In the heart of the vast Alaskan wilderness, Samuel Harper lived a life of quiet solitude. His cabin, nestled among towering pines, was a sanctuary far removed from the noise of the world. The rhythm of his days followed nature's cues, the rising sun, the changing seasons, and the occasional trip to the small town of Timber Ridge for supplies. A man of few words, Samuel found companionship in the whisper of the wind and the cry of eagles soaring high above the snow-capped peaks. One crisp autumn morning, Samuel was chopping wood near the edge of his property when a sound shattered the tranquil silence. A low growl, sharp and guttural, sent a chill racing down his spine. Pausing mid-swing, his sharp eyes scanned the dense undergrowth. There, amidst a tangle of fallen leaves, lay a wolf. A creature of wild beauty, now reduced to a vulnerable shadow of itself. The wolf's leg was twisted unnaturally, its fur matted with blood, its amber eyes, fierce yet pleading, locked with Samuel's. Instinct urged him to back away. Wolves were untamed forces of nature, not to be trifled with. Yet something in those eyes held him fast, a vulnerability that pierced the armor of his solitude. Carefully, Samuel inched closer. His voice was low and steady, a bridge of calm in the tense silence. "Easy there, boy. I won't hurt you." The wolf growled, baring its teeth, but made no move to flee. It was trapped, its pain evident in each ragged breath. Samuel faced a choice. The nearest town was miles away, and his knowledge of wild animals was limited. Yet leaving the wolf to suffer was unthinkable. He returned to his cabin, retrieving an old blanket and rope. Speaking softly, he approached again, wrapping the injured animal with care. Its body was heavier than he expected, and its whimpers echoed in his ears as he placed it in the bed of his weathered truck. The drive to Timber Ridge was slow and nerve-wracking, every jolt of the road a reminder of the fragile life he carried. As the town's small veterinary clinic came into view, Samuel could only hope that the young vet, Dr. Eliza Graham, could offer the creature a second chance. The bell above the door of Timber Ridge Veterinary Clinic jingled as Samuel pushed it open, cradling the injured wolf wrapped in a tattered blanket. The room smelled of antiseptic and wood polish, a stark contrast to the earthy wilderness he'd left behind. Dr. Eliza Graham, a young woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence, looked up from her desk. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern as she took in the scene. "Samuel? What on earth?" she began, rising to meet him. "I need your help," he interrupted, his voice strained. "Found this wolf on my property. It's hurt bad." Eliza's brow furrowed as she approached, her gaze softening when she saw the creature's battered body. "A wolf? Are you sure it's wise to bring it here?" she asked, already gesturing toward the examination room. "Couldn't just leave it to die," Samuel said firmly. Together, they laid the wolf on the steel table. Eliza moved with practiced precision, carefully peeling away the blanket to reveal the extent of its injuries. The leg was broken, a clean but severe break. Deep gashes marred the animal's flank, and its ribs protruded from malnutrition. Eliza sighed. "He's been through hell, likely a fight with another wolf, or maybe a trap. He's lucky you found him." "Can you help him?" Samuel's voice was low, almost pleading. He hadn't expected to feel so invested in the creature's survival. Eliza met his gaze, her eyes resolute. "I'll do everything I can, but you need to know, this isn't like treating a dog. He's wild, scared, and there's no guarantee he'll make it." "I'll do whatever it takes," Samuel said. The conviction in his tone surprised even himself. Eliza nodded, her demeanor shifting into focus. "Then let's get to work." She moved quickly, administering a sedative to calm the wolf's restless tremors. The animal's body gradually relaxed under the medication's influence, its growls subsiding to soft whimpers. Eliza cleaned the wounds with steady hands, stitching the deepest cuts and wrapping the broken leg in a sturdy cast. Samuel stayed by her side, holding the wolf steady when needed and fetching supplies. He was struck by Eliza's calm authority, her unyielding dedication to the creature before her. As she worked, he felt an unexpected kinship with the wolf, both survivors in their own way, tethered by the fragility of life. "He'll need antibiotics and a strict regimen of care," Eliza explained as she finished her work. "And he can't stay here. I don't have the facilities." Samuel nodded, already anticipating her next words. "Will you take him?" she asked gently. "He needs a safe place to heal. You're the only one I trust for this." The weight of her request settled over him. His life was simple, predictable, a carefully built fortress against the chaos of the world. Taking in a wild animal would upend everything. But then he looked at the wolf, its eyes half closed, its breath shallow but steady. In its battered form, he saw not just wildness, but resilience. "I'll take him," Samuel said at last, his voice firm. Eliza smiled, relief softening her features. "Then let's get him home." As Samuel carried the sleeping wolf back to his truck, he couldn't shake the sense that this moment marked the beginning of something profound. The wilderness had brought the creature to him, and now its fate rested in his hands. He was no longer just a man of solitude. He was a man with a purpose. The journey back to Samuel's cabin was slow and quiet. The wolf, now sedated and wrapped in layers of blankets, lay motionless in the truck bed. The rhythmic hum of the engine seemed to lull the creature into deeper sleep, but Samuel couldn't relax. His mind raced with doubts. How was he, a man accustomed to solitude, supposed to care for a wild animal? What if he failed? When he arrived home, the forest was bathed in the golden glow of dusk. Samuel carefully carried the wolf into his barn, where he had hastily prepared a makeshift enclosure. A corner of the space was lined with hay for bedding, surrounded by wooden boards to keep the animal secure but comfortable. A bowl of fresh water and a blanket completed the setup. It wasn't much, but it was all he could manage on short notice. He gently laid the wolf on the bedding, checking to ensure the cast on its leg was secure. The animal stirred faintly, a low growl escaping its throat. Samuel stepped back, giving it space. "Easy there," he murmured. "You're safe now." Over the next few days, Samuel dedicated himself to the wolf's care. Following Dr. Eliza's instructions, he cleaned the wounds daily, changed the bandages, and administered antibiotics. It was slow, painstaking work, and the wolf was far from a willing patient. Every growl, every flash of teeth reminded Samuel that he was dealing with a creature of the wild. Yet, there were moments of quiet understanding between them. When the wolf's amber eyes locked with his, Samuel felt a flicker of connection, something raw and unspoken. He began talking to the wolf as he worked, sharing bits of his life. "You've got a name now," he said one afternoon as he cleaned a gash on its side. "Ghost. Suits you, doesn't it? Pale like a shadow, silent like the wind." Ghost's ears twitched at the sound of his name, and Samuel smiled faintly. It was a small victory, but it gave him hope. One evening, as Samuel sat outside the barn sharpening an old knife, Ghost let out a soft whimper. He glanced over, finding the wolf watching him with cautious eyes. Samuel set the knife aside and approached slowly, his hands open in a gesture of peace. Ghost didn't growl this time, only watched. "You're not so different from me, are you?" Samuel said softly, alone, fighting to survive. To his astonishment, Ghost lowered his head onto the hay, his body relaxing ever so slightly. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall that separated them. As the days turned into weeks, Samuel noticed more changes. Ghost began eating with less hesitation, drinking water without the wary glances that had marked his early days in the barn. Though still distant, he allowed Samuel to sit closer during their quiet evenings together. Slowly, a fragile bond began to form, a connection forged not through force, but through patience and mutual respect. Samuel realized that Ghost wasn't just healing physically, he was learning to trust again, and in turn, Samuel found himself opening to something he hadn't felt in years: companionship. But Ghost's amber eyes still held a question Samuel couldn't answer. What would come next? As autumn deepened, the bond between Samuel and Ghost grew stronger. Though the wolf remained cautious, the moments of trust grew more frequent. Samuel found himself talking to Ghost as if the wolf could understand. Ghost, in his way, seemed to listen, his ears twitching, his gaze steady, his presence a quiet reassurance in Samuel's once lonely life. But life in the wilderness was never predictable. One evening, the sound of distant barking shattered the peaceful quiet. Samuel had been sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of wood, when the commotion drew his attention. Dogs, their frantic barks sharp and urgent, echoed through the trees. Samuel stood, his heart pounding, as the unmistakable shouts of men followed. A hunt was underway. Ghost, resting in his enclosure in the barn, rose to his feet. His ears perked, his body tense. Samuel walked quickly to him, placing a calming hand on the enclosure door. "Stay put, Ghost," he said firmly, though his own nerves were frayed. "I'll see what's going on." Before Samuel could step outside, a figure stumbled out of the woods and into the clearing near the cabin. A boy, no older than 8. His clothes were torn, his face pale with terror. Behind him, a pack of hounds burst through the undergrowth, their eyes wild, their snarls feral. "Hey!" Samuel shouted, rushing forward to shield the boy. The dogs hesitated, their snarling intensifying as they eyed Samuel. The boy clung to Samuel's leg, sobbing. From the barn, a deep growl rumbled. Samuel turned just in time to see Ghost leap over the enclosure fence, his movements swift and fluid, despite his still healing leg. The wolf was a blur of pale gray as he charged the hounds, his growls fierce and unrelenting. The dogs scattered in confusion, yelping as Ghost's snarls cut through the chaos. Samuel's breath caught in his throat as he watched the wolf, a creature of wild power, protect both him and the terrified boy. Within moments, the dogs retreated, disappearing into the trees. Ghost stood tall, his body rigid, his amber eyes scanning the forest. Samuel knelt beside the boy, who buried his face in Samuel's shoulder. "It's okay," Samuel murmured. "You're safe now." As the adrenaline subsided, Samuel turned to Ghost. The wolf's gaze met his, and for the first time Samuel saw not just wild instinct but something deeper. Loyalty, trust, and an unspoken bond. The boy's parents arrived soon after, frantic and grateful. As they hugged their son, they looked at Ghost with awe rather than fear. "That wolf saved our boy," the father said, his voice thick with emotion. Word of the incident spread quickly through Timber Ridge. Once wary of the wolf, the townsfolk began to see him in a new light. Ghost was no longer just a wild animal. He was a protector, a hero. But Samuel knew that this act of loyalty had only deepened the inevitable question. What was Ghost's place in the world? Was he meant to stay by Samuel's side, or would the call of the wild eventually take him back to the wilderness? For now, Samuel chose not to dwell on it. Ghost had proven himself in the most profound way, and their bond was stronger than ever. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. The story of Ghost's bravery spread like wildfire through Timber Ridge, transforming the wolf's image from a wild beast to a symbol of courage. Samuel, once a recluse on the edge of the town, found himself the reluctant center of attention. Neighbors who had barely spoken to him before now stopped by the feed store to ask about Ghost. Children drew pictures of the pale wolf, their colorful crayon sketches brightening the walls of the town's small schoolhouse. Despite the newfound respect Ghost commanded, not everyone was convinced he belonged among humans. Sheriff Miller, a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, visited Samuel one afternoon, pulling his patrol truck into the clearing with a low rumble. "Samuel," the sheriff began, stepping out and adjusting his wide-brimmed hat. "We need to talk." Samuel straightened from where he was repairing Ghost's enclosure, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Sheriff, you know the town's been buzzing about that wolf of yours," Miller said, his tone even. "Most folks are impressed, sure, but some are uneasy. A wild animal like him, there's always a risk. You understand that, don't you?" Samuel sighed, brushing his hands on his jeans. I do. But Ghost isn't a threat. He's proven that. The sheriff glanced toward the barn, where Ghost was lying in the shade, his amber eyes watching the exchange. He's done good, I'll admit that. But wild's still wild. You're taking on a big responsibility, Samuel. I know, Samuel replied, his voice firm, and I'll stand by it. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right, just know, if there's any trouble, you'll be the one answering for it. Samuel watched the sheriff drive away, a weight settling in his chest. He knew the risk, knew that not everyone shared his conviction. But Ghost had become more than just a wild animal to him. He was a part of Samuel's life, a connection he hadn't realized he was missing. Back at the barn, Samuel crouched beside Ghost, running a hand gently over the wolf's head. Looks like we've got a lot to prove, huh, boy? Ghost leaned into the touch, his eyes soft but alert. Life with Ghost had become a delicate balance. Samuel continued to follow Dr. Eliza's instructions, working to strengthen Ghost's leg and ensure his overall recovery. At the same time, he began to notice the wolf's instincts reawakening. Ghost would pace the enclosure restlessly at night, his ears pricked toward the distant howls of other wolves. His gaze lingered on the tree line, a silent yearning evident in his stance. Eliza visited regularly, her sharp eyes assessing both Ghost's progress and Samuel's bond with him. On one visit, she sat on the porch with Samuel, a cup of tea warming her hands. He's doing well, she said, her voice thoughtful. Better than I expected. But you've noticed it too, haven't you? The way he looks at the woods. Samuel nodded, his expression clouded. He's healing, but he's restless. He's meant to be out there. Eliza hesitated before speaking. There's a sanctuary up north, a place for wolves like him. They have a vast enclosed area where he can live freely with others of his kind. I've been in touch with them, and they're willing to take Ghost. Samuel's heart clenched. He had known this moment was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud was like reopening an old wound. When? He asked, his voice hoarse. Not yet, Eliza assured him, but soon. He's almost ready. The thought of parting with Ghost was almost unbearable. But Samuel knew it was the right thing to do. Ghost was not a creature to be confined forever. He belonged to the wild, to the endless forests and open skies. In the weeks that followed, Samuel began preparing himself for the inevitable goodbye. He took Ghost on long walks through the woods, allowing him to explore, to reacquaint himself with the world he had been pulled from. Ghost seemed to thrive, his strength returning, his movements fluid and powerful once more. Yet every step Samuel took alongside the wolf felt bittersweet. Their bond had grown deep, but it was a bond destined to be tested by the call of the wild. As much as Samuel wanted to keep Ghost by his side, he knew love sometimes meant letting go. He just wasn't sure how he would face the silence Ghost would leave behind. The day Samuel had dreaded finally arrived. The sanctuary staff pulled into the clearing in a large transport vehicle designed for wolves, its sides painted with a logo of a forest scene. Ghost stood in his enclosure, watching the commotion with calm curiosity, unaware of the significance of the moment. Samuel stood on the porch, his hands gripping the railing as if to steady himself. Eliza approached him, her expression gentle but resolute. They'll take good care of him, Samuel. It's the best place for him to thrive. Samuel nodded, though his chest felt heavy with the weight of impending loss. I know, he said quietly. It's just hard. The sanctuary staff worked efficiently, setting up a ramp and securing the area to ensure Ghost's safety during the transport. Samuel opened the enclosure gate, stepping inside to face the wolf. Ghost watched him intently, his amber eyes filled with a trust that made Samuel's throat tighten. Well, Ghost, Samuel said, crouching to meet the wolf at eye level. His voice wavered, thick with emotion. It's time for you to go. Time to be what you were always meant to be. Ghost tilted his head, his ears twitching at Samuel's tone. The wolf took a step closer, resting his nose against Samuel's outstretched hand. The simple gesture, a rare show of affection from the once wild creature, brought tears to Samuel's eyes. "You'll be okay," Samuel murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I promise." With great effort, Samuel stood and signaled to the staff. They approached carefully, coaxing Ghost onto the transport ramp. The wolf hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Samuel one last time before stepping into the crate. The door closed with a quiet click, and Samuel felt a part of himself close with it. As the vehicle pulled away, Samuel stood alone in the clearing, watching until it disappeared down the dirt road. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the life Ghost had brought into his world. He turned back to the cabin, his footsteps heavy, his heart hollow. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. Samuel went through his routines mechanically, with the absence of Ghost a constant ache. The barn felt empty, the woods lifeless. Even the crisp autumn air seemed colder, sharper without the wolf's presence. One evening, Samuel sat on the porch, staring out at the forest as the sun dipped below the horizon. A rustle in the undergrowth caught his attention, and for a fleeting moment his heart leapt. But it was only the wind, teasing the branches and stirring the fallen leaves. Yet, despite the emptiness, Samuel found solace in the thought that Ghost was where he belonged. He pictured the wolf running free in the sanctuary's vast expanse, his leg healed, his spirit untamed. He imagined Ghost among his own kind, forming bonds, howling at the moon, and reclaiming the wildness that had always been his birthright. As the stars began to dot the darkening sky, Samuel leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He had given Ghost a second chance at life, and in doing so he had found a purpose, a connection, and a love that had changed him forever. And though Ghost was gone, the bond they had forged remained, a silent, unbreakable thread, tying two souls together, across distances and worlds. Winter arrived swiftly in Timber Ridge, blanketing the forest in pristine snow. Samuel spent his days chopping wood, tending to his cabin, and walking the trails where he and Ghost had once roamed. Though the wolf's absence was palpable, the memories of their time together kept Samuel warm in the coldest moments. The town, too, had changed. Ghost's story had become a legend, told around fireplaces and during holiday gatherings. Children played in the snow, pretending to be wolves, their laughter echoing through the streets. Samuel, once a solitary figure, found himself woven into the fabric of the community. He shared stories about Ghost, teaching the townsfolk about the importance of compassion for animals and for each other. One crisp morning, as Samuel walked a familiar trail, he heard a sound that made him stop in his tracks, the haunting, melodic howl of a wolf. His heart raced as he scanned the snow-covered forest, his breath visible in the frigid air. The sound came again, closer this time, a call that sent shivers down his spine. Then he saw it, a pale figure emerging from the tree line. For a moment, Samuel's heart stopped. It was a wolf, its coat as pale as winter's breath, its amber eyes piercing through the frosty air. It wasn't Ghost, but the resemblance was undeniable. The wolf stepped closer, its movements cautious but curious, its gaze steady on Samuel. Samuel knelt slowly, extending a hand as he had done so many months before. "You must be one of his," he murmured, his voice soft with wonder. The wolf took another step, its nose twitching as it caught Samuel's scent. It paused, then sat, its tail sweeping the snow in a gesture that felt almost friendly. A quiet understanding passed between them. This wolf, a descendant of Ghost, or perhaps just a kindred spirit, had been drawn to the place where compassion had once saved one of its own. It was as though Ghost's legacy had come full circle, his story continuing in ways Samuel couldn't have imagined. From that day forward, the wolf became a frequent visitor, often watching Samuel from the edge of the clearing, or walking beside him on his solitary treks through the forest. Though it never fully bridged the gap between wild and tame, its presence brought Samuel a sense of peace, a reminder that his connection to Ghost, and to the wild was eternal. Years passed, and Samuel grew older. His hair silvered like the frost that adorned the trees each winter. Yet his spirit remained strong, nourished by the memories of his time with Ghost and the quiet companionship of the wolf who had chosen to stay near. One final winter came, and Samuel, wrapped in a warm blanket, sat on his porch as the first snowflakes began to fall. The pale wolf appeared at the edge of the clearing, its eyes bright and its stance proud. Samuel smiled, a sense of deep contentment settling over him. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice carried on the wind. As the wolf disappeared into the trees, Samuel leaned back and closed his eyes, the sounds of the forest filling his ears. Though his journey was nearing its end, he knew the story of Ghost, of love and healing, would live on in the hearts of the town, the whispers of the woods, and the howl of every wolf that roamed the wilderness. And in that moment, Samuel felt truly at peace, cradled by the memory of a bond that had forever bridged the distance between man and the wild. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our latest videos. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. Thank you all for taking the time to watch, and see you in the next video.